Have you ever wondered why a man only begins to feel you when you're no longer there? Not when you're laughing beside him, not when you're staying up late to soothe his wounded pride, not when your voice folds itself around his name like a prayer. No, he begins to feel you truly only when your echo replaces your presence. Because presence is taken for granted by the ego, but absence pierces the psyche. It becomes mythic. When she leaves, she ceases to be a woman. She becomes a symbol. A man does not miss the dinners, the messages, the gentle touch at 2 a.m. He doesn't miss the specifics. He doesn't ache logically. Instead, something stirs deeper than conscious thought. He is haunted not by memory, but by mystery. The psychic imprint of the feminine disappears from his outer world and begins to grow roots in his shadow. He becomes obsessed with a ghost, your ghost. Carl Jung taught us that the feminine represents not just womanhood, but the soul's passage into the unconscious. The anima, she is chaos to his order, emotion to his mind, feeling to his logic. She is the mirror and the wound and the invitation. And when she vanishes, he is left only with reflection, with himself. He begins to see the places you once touched, and in those shadows, see the places he never touched within himself. This is not pain, it is disintegration. Most men don't understand the woman they lost until they face the version of themselves they became in her absence. It is not you specifically he chases. It is who he was when you were there. A man fears the void not because it is empty, but because it forces him to face the voice he silenced his whole life. Once she's gone, he hears it. In the still hours of the night when his phone stays silent, when another woman's voice fails to ignite the flame your silence lit, he begins to notice. You're not just gone. You've become architecture in his unconscious. You've become the archetypal loss. And the male psyche, tethered to conquest, cannot comprehend the woman who leaves without needing closure. Because you did leave him. You withdrew spiritually, psychologically. You severed the soul cord. To the unaware man, that is annihilation. Trauma isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet absence of someone who once made him feel like more than who he was. And that is the hardest thing for the fragile ego, being seen, truly seen. Not for perfection, not for projection, but in all its masculine fear and beauty and unworthiness. You saw him, and now you're gone. And now his shadow begins to twitch. You must understand, the male psyche unhealed is structured not on expansion of soul, but on compensation. He performs what he thinks will be loved. He becomes who he thinks will be wanted. And when you withdraw your light, he collapses into the version of himself that no one claps for. The one who is not needed, not adored. The boy nobody saved. He becomes the only thing he's terrified of, invisible. And that is why you haunt him, not because you're unforgettable, but because you saw the part of him he wishes to forget. This is the feminine power hidden in detachment, not bitterness, not pride, but the unconscious knowing that you were the portal to something deeper. And now that door is closed, he stands before it, not knocking, but kneeling. He doesn't want you back to love you. He wants you back to love himself again. But shadow work doesn't work that way. The path back isn't through your arms, it's through his own darkness. You were never his to possess. You were the mirror, the lesson, the storm that didn't need to rage to change the landscape. In your silence, something profoundly spiritual happened. He mistook your presence for comfort, but your absence, it became initiation. The kind of woman who becomes sacred is not the one who stays to beg for worthiness. It's the one who walks away with dignity and lets the silence speak on her behalf. And make no mistake, silence speaks. It screams inside of him when he reaches for the phone and sees no message. It whispers in his skin when he finds other women too available to mesmerize. It echoes in his nervous system when he scans through memories, realizing you were never trying to own him. You were trying to awaken him. And he slept through it. But now, in the cold sanctuary of loss, he listens. Not for your voice, but for the version of himself you dared him to become, and he wasn't ready. You were not a chapter, you were the threshold. And some men, when faced with the threshold of true intimacy, run so far backwards they think it's forward. Let him run. The woman who knows her worth does not chase, she chooses. And so it begins, the slow erosion of his control, not over you, for you were never his to command, but over the version of himself he curated in your light. He crafted that version for your gaze, molded his words like offerings, and adjusted his posture to embody certainty. But it was never real. It was a masked con, structured in the shallow waters of ego. And now, without your presence to anchor it, the mask begins to crack. Your absence is not silence to him. It is confrontation. A quiet but relentless confrontation with every part of himself he refused to acknowledge. Beneath the polished surface he showed the world lies a storm of unmet need, hidden fear, arrested growth. Jung called it the shadow, the unclaimed, unconscious debris of psyche. And now, in the haunted spaces where your laughter once lived, those shadows rise. He does not miss you like the world defines missing. He is not simply longing. He is unraveling. Because when a woman of depth leaves, she doesn't just walk out. She takes the mirror with her. The sacred mirror. The one in which he glimpsed not who he is, but who he could be. And now, without her reflection to orient by, he drowns in the shallows of his own untested masculinity. He cannot say this out loud. He cannot name the grief because grief is admission, and admission demands inner work. Instead, he may distract himself with other women, hollow conversations, noise. He'll seek novelty, mistaking it for healing, confusing motion with movement. But nothing lands, nothing sticks, because it was never about replacing you asterisk. It was about avoiding himself. And no woman can rescue a man from the work he refuses to do in solitude. What he feels is not nostalgia, it is fragmentation. Because you were not just a comfort, you were a catalyst, and catalysts don't come quietly. They come wrapped in soft skin, steady eyes, and the kind of presence that makes a man question why he ever settled for being half awake. You weren't perfect, but you were asterisk-tuned in asterisk, and that frequency cannot be recreated. It was earned through silence, through depth, through the long nights you spent building yourself instead of begging him to see you. And now he sees. But not in light. He sees in shadows, in the ache behind pleasure, in the gap between his bravado and his truth, in the way his favorite songs hit differently ever since you fell silent. He wonders where the aliveness went, not realizing it was never in asterisk you asterisk. It was in the mirror you offered him, and now the mirror is gone. This is the paradox of the feminine wound. The more she tries to explain, the more she is invalidated. The more she chases, the more she is trivialized. But the moment she withdraws with clarity, she becomes myth. Not a fantasy, but an archetype. The woman who awakened him without needing to stay, who reminded him of soul without ever preaching salvation. And still, he will not admit it, because to admit her impact is to admit his blindness. And so he chooses the safer story, that she was too emotional, too intense, too complex, not compatible. He'll say, she wanted too much. When in truth, she wanted him asterisk, not the mask, not the version, but the man behind the shield. But he gave her fragments, and now he finds himself asterisk missing her in pieces. The scent in the coffee shop that reminds him of her hair, the way a stranger says his name too gently, the silence of Sunday mornings. These are not memories, they are hauntings, and they do not go away with time, because time does not heal what ego protects. Only truth does that. But truth is not easy for the uninitiated. It demands surrender. It requires the man to drop his sword and descend into his own vulnerability, into the room where the boy still waits to be seen, where love is not performance, just presence. And if he is brave, he will follow the echo of your absence like a map back to himself. He will explore the caverns you pointed to, the wounds you once kissed but could never close. He will look in the mirror, not for you, but for the version of himself that finally feels worthy of the love you once gave so freely. But that is his path now, not yours to walk, not yours to wait for. Because while he is haunted by what could have been, you are becoming who you were always meant to be, without apology. No longer trapped in the feedback loop of emotional proving, no longer addicted to being enough. You have learned that nothing, nothing, is more magnetic than a woman who knows she does not belong where she has to break herself to be understood. Let him miss you. Let him wander. Let him hear your absence like a hymn he doesn't know the lyrics to anymore. And let yourself rise, as the woman who doesn't return to fix, to explain, or to soothe the discomfort of a man who could not hold your depth. He doesn't miss you. He's haunted. Grief disguised as ego is a cunning thing. It doesn't cry, it criticizes. It doesn't apologize, it analyzes. It doesn't admit loss, it rewrites history. And this is exactly how the haunted man copes, not through feeling but through reframing. He cannot sit with the echo of your absence without building stories to make sense of it. He convinces himself you were too much, too fast, too unreadable, because the truth is unbearable. That he didn't show up. That he only stopped. Arted to feel when it was too late. That your absence revealed his hollowness far more brutally than your presence ever could. You see, men are not taught to enter their inner world. They are taught to conquer the world instead, to win, to achieve, to dominate. But no one teaches them how to sit down in the quiet, face their fear of being seen, and ask, who am I without someone else's attention? Jung knew this. He knew that the male psyche, untethered from the feminine principle, becomes brittle. It overcompensates with bravado, performance, and projection. It cannot hold space for nuance, for emotion, contradiction, or mystery. And so, when a woman of soul enters his field, she disrupts that rigidity. She brings chaos to his order, not through destruction, but by demanding depth. And he feels it. Every part of him that he's denied tries to surface in her presence. But instead of surrendering, he retreats. He may even punish her for it. Not always cruelly, sometimes gently, with distance, with lukewarm love, with diluted words. He gives crumbs not because he's evil, but because he's afraid of becoming intimate with his own depths, afraid of needing someone who doesn't need him to be whole, but chooses him from wholeness. Because that kind of woman, is disarming. You represent eros with boundaries, softness with limits, nurture with wildness, presence with silence. You defy categorization. You don't beg, you beckon. You don't perform, you become asterisk. And that becomes unbearable for the man who equates intimacy with control. So he doesn't say it aloud, but he watches. He feels the pull, not to your body but to your field, to your sovereignty, to the way your absence doesn't chase asterisk, to the way your silence grows roots in his nervous system. Let that land. Your silence is not void. It is structure in his psyche. A silent temple built from every moment you held your truth rather than making yourself small just to be kept. You were never just a romantic partner. You were a psychic initiator, the kind of woman who opens the door to emotional maturation and walks away when the invitation is declined. And that's the part he can't explain to his friends. That's the part that doesn't fit in dating advice columns or frat boy podcasts peddling emotional shortcuts. Because this isn't about a girl he liked. This is about the woman who reflected the man he refused to become. That reflection, once gone, becomes unbearable. And so haunted he stays. Haunted not by your perfume or your voice or the curve of your smile, no. Haunted by the image of himself you held with such reverence, such faith, such fierce belief, and that he didn't choose. That image now lives in his dreams. That version of him who could have stood beside you, not above you, not behind you, but beside you as an equal in spirit and depth and awareness. He sees that man now, the one you believed in. He sees him in the rearview mirror of regret, in the silence between meaningless conversations, in the hollowness that no good girl or easy intimacy can quite fill. And he'll try, oh how he'll try, to replace, to outrun, to forget. But the feminine that has walked through her own underworld leaves behind something no man can fully wash away, the scent of initiation. That scent becomes a memory. That memory becomes a longing. That longing becomes a hunger, not for you, but for the version of himself he touched only briefly in your presence before retreating into the comfort of his known self. What he doesn't realize is that you never tried to change him. You simply revealed him to himself. And now your absence is a mirror he cannot put down. He may posture, he may pretend, he may even resent you, but in his most honest moments, when the world is asleep and no eyes are watching, he traces the echo of your energy back to a place in him that still hurts. A place he may never show anyone. A place only you touched because you didn't touch his surface. You touched his essence asterisk. And that lingers. Not because you were loud, but because you were asterisk, real asterisk. Not because you chased, but because you saw asterisk. Not because you filled his life, but because you lit asterisk it, however briefly, with something eternal. You are not the one who lost. You are the one who asterisk left the door open and walked through it alone when he wouldn't join you. And now your absence is not a punishment. It is evolution. He doesn't miss you. He misses the man he could have been in the eyes of a woman like you. There is something sacred in a woman who can love deeply and still walk away. Not storm out in rage, not slam doors in desperation, no. She leaves like falling snow in the dead of night. Quiet, certain, inevitable, and that kind of departure doesn't shake the surface, it shakes the soul. This is what he can't escape. It's not that you were the best he ever had. It's not that your body, your kisses, your voice were unmatched. It's that you loved him clearly without distortion. You off. Read him a mirror untainted by performance or fantasy. You stood still and let him see asterisk, not only you but himself. And then you left. Not because you stopped loving him, but because you started loving yourself more. That for a man who hasn't yet earned his own wholeness is unbearable. The male psyche, especially when unhealed, equates leaving with betrayal. It clings not to love but to power. It wants to be needed more than it wants to be seen. It prefers dependency over depth, worship over witness. And when you refuse to offer that sacrifice, when you refuse to need him in order to stay, something inside him broke. Not his heart, his illusion. Because you were never his to keep, you were only his to meet, to truly meet, eye to eye, soul to soul, edge to sacred edge. But when he blinked, when he pulled back into safety, into avoidance, into performative control, you were gone. Not out of cruelty, but out of grace. A quiet bow to a dance that only one remained present for. And now he walks among shadows, no longer sure of what was real and what was projection. He will reach for others and subconsciously compare, not in words, not in statements, but in energy. In moments where something feels asterisk missing, even though everything seems asterisk fine asterisk. In half seconds when someone touches his arm and it feels hollow asterisk. In dreams where your face is replaced by smoke, but the feeling remains. Because the feeling wasn't about you. It was the feeling of himself becoming through your presence. And nothing is quite as haunting as the memory of your own potential, glimpsed and then lost. That is the truth women like you leave behind. Not bruises, not chaos, but possibility. You were not a storm. You were a still lake that reflected him so purely he couldn't bear to look. And now he lives in the desert of distraction, pretending it was just a phase, just a connection, just a woman. But deep down he knows. He knows you could see through him in a way no one else did. He knows that when you asked him to open, to feel, to face himself, you weren't demanding more, you were calling him home. And he stayed on the threshold. So now you live in the architecture of his almosts, the sacred ache of what he wasn't brave enough to touch, the alchemy of regret. Because regret is a powerful teacher. It strips away the stories, it silences the noise, and it leads a man, if he allows it, back to truth. If he chooses to go there, he may begin the journey of individuation. He will descend into the underworld of his own psyche, face the shadows he once avoided, peel the layers of ego from the raw skin of his heart. He may meet the wounded boy who never thought he could be enough for divine love. He may weep without shame. He may scream without needing to be heard. And in time, he may find the man you once saw sleeping beneath all that armor. But that process cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It cannot be mothered into him by the woman who already offered her soul and was left standing in her own echo. It must be chosen asterisk by him. And while he walks that fire, if he ever dares to, you walk another path. The path of the woman who learned that her love does not need to shrink to be received. The path of the woman who no longer trades her softness for security. The path of the woman who stops waiting to be understood and begins embodying her own understanding. Your silence is not punishment. It is sanctification. Your absence is not cruelty. It is consequence. And you are not a wound. You are the asterisk threshold in his life story. The one he will recount in quiet moments. Not as a failure, but as the moment when he was invited to truly wake up. Some men accept the invitation. Most do not. But regardless of which path he chooses, the haunting remains not of you, but of the self he touched while being loved by you. That's what lingers. That's what echoes. That's what no other woman can replace. Because no other woman will asterisk require him to rise as you did. And now you move differently. Not bitter, not closed, but clear asterisk. Rooted, unbothered by the past, because the most sacred parts of you were never wasted. They became asterisk you asterisk. And you asterisk now are no longer someone's memory. You are your own unfolding. Some men spend their entire lives chasing the woman they felt safest avoiding. Not because she harmed them, but because she saw them fully and made them feel. And feeling is dangerous for the uninitiated man. To feel is to unravel the systems he's built, the stories he clings to, the armor that kept him afloat in the face of his own inadequacy. When you loved him, you touched not just his heart, but his unconscious. Not just his desires, but the parts of himself he buried beneath years of performance. You didn't fall in love with his image. You fell in love with his essence. And he could feel that. He didn't want it exposed, not yet. He wasn't ready to be loved in the light of truth. He was still addicted to bane. G adored in the fog of illusion. And so he pulled away, not as an act of cruelty, but as a ritual of preservation. He preserved his comfort, his limitations, his untested masculinity, and in doing so, he lost the woman who required none of it, only presence. One day, he will understand, not from reading theory, not from advice, but from the bone-deep ache of waking up next to a woman who doesn't challenge him, listening to her laughter and realizing it doesn't echo into his soul the way yours did. Because the loss of a woman, rooted in her own worth, doesn't feel sudden. It feels eternal asterisk. It doesn't strike like lightning, it settles like fog, slowly wrapping around his mind, then slipping into his bloodstream. The memory of how your silence made him realize his own emptiness, of how your absence finally gave him what your presence never could, the mirror of self. Some women shatter a man's world by leaving. You rebuilt yours by doing so. You didn't need to prove your worth once more. You didn't beg him to choose you. You chose yourself in the face of a bond your soul once called home. That is not weakness. That is initiation. That is the true feminine rising, not to dominate, not to punish, but to release what cannot meet her in fullness. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that is what your absence did. It made his unconscious conscious, not through conversation but through emptiness asterisk. He didn't just lose a woman, he lost the illusion that he was whole while rejecting soul. You were love without attachment, intimacy without chaos, fire without destruction. You didn't ask him to earn you, you asked him to see himself, and that terrified the parts of him he keeps locked in polished cages behind pride and pretense. So he chose separation, and now he calls it maturity. He wears detachment like a badge. He flirts with new energy, hoping to numb the imprint you left until he realizes it's not you he's looking for. It's the man he was asterisk becoming with you. But you've already moved beyond the field of waiting. You no longer sit on the edges of potential, praying for him to change. You've tasted the solitude that blooms not from loneliness, but from liberation. You've reclaimed what was never his to validate, your own worth. And now, without you there to reflect anything, he meets nothing but shadows. Shadows he must either face or keep running from. You represent spiritual gravity, and most are not ready for that weight. They want wings without wind, fire without burn, love without transformation. But the feminine is not soft because she's passive. She's soft because she's certain, because she asterisk knows, because the depth of her presence requires a man to rise or retreat. And now he's circling the memory, not to have you again, but to understand why having you required more than he could give. You never asked for perfection. Only presence. Only truth. Only willingness. He felt that, and it terrified him more than anything else. That's the paradox. He didn't lose you because you were too much. He lost you because you did need asterisk to be more. And now, your absence tells the story his ego won't admit. That he was given access to something eternal and blinked. Some part of him will always search you in silence. Not in women who are louder. Not in words that are clearer. Not in moments that are easier. But in the places he never dared to go until you left him no choice. You didn't walk away to punish him. You walked away because your soul refuses to stay in places that celebrate your wounds but fear your wisdom. You were not the fantasy. You were the threshold. And whether or not he ever crosses it, that is no longer your concern. Because the woman who walks away in her own name is not leaving the man. She's returning to herself asterisk. And in doing so, she becomes what no man can possess, but every man remembers asterisk. A memory not of her body, but of his own awakening. And what happens to a man when he remembers a woman not with longing, but with reverence? What happens when he stops rewriting the story to soothe his ego and begins to admit that he faced divinity in her presence and chose comfort instead? He doesn't cry. He doesn't confess. He transforms or he fragments. There's no middle path when the feminine becomes myth. You, the woman of stillness and wildfire, now live in the in-between, between what he could have reached and what he failed to hold. You are no longer a character in his life. You are the moment he met the edge of himself and turned away. He knows you will not reach back. He knows you will not explain. Because something in the way you left was final. Not hateful, not cold, but wholly asterisk, like prayer when it's over, like ceremony in the last candle flicker, like watching the moon disappear behind clouds knowing it's not gone, it's just no longer for him to see. And that's what haunts him. Why? Our presence didn't end. It transcended. You are not the woman waiting to be chosen anymore. You are the woman who asterisk chooses asterisk, who sits with herself like a queen sits in a silent kingdom. Your throne isn't built from conquest but from clarity. Your eyes do not chase, they reveal. And men will feel that now. They will sense the ancient gatekeeper in your tone, the priestess behind your smile, The untouchable softness of someone who no longer explains her worth, only vibrates it. He may come back, not to reclaim, to repent asterisk, to relive, to relink himself to some version of you, but that version is gone. She died in your silence. She resurrected in solitude, and the woman he returns to is not the woman he left. You outgrew the ache. You outgrew the proving. You outgrew the dream of being held by someone who couldn't hold himself. And in that becoming, you became untouchable, not unreachable, but no longer seduced by potential, not moved by charm, not softened by half-presence. You became what only the initiated can stand beside, a woman of conscious choice. Carl Jung taught that the goal of life is individuation, the unfolding of the soul, the union of shadow and light into wholeness. That is what you did, not by meditating, not by escaping, but by loving someone deeply, and then loving yourself more when it became clear they would not walk beside your fire. Your absence was not a departure. It was a return to your own center, to the throne no man can build for you, to the knowing that says, I will not die in anyone's forgetting just to be remembered. Now he may sit with quiet women, hoping to feel your flame. He may hold unscarred hearts, hoping to feel your depth. He may scroll through messages that mean nothing, because they don't carry the signature of your soul. But you've exited the arena. Not bitter, not proud, just done. Because women who come with mirrors in their hands don't return to men who cover their eyes. You walk now with your head high, not because you won, but because you woke up. Because you no longer confuse attention with value. Because your silence is now your loudest language. And because you refuse to live in a heart that must lose you to feel you. Wholeness is no longer a story you try to write with someone else's pen. You are the page. You are the ink. You are the myth and the memory, and the flame that writes without needing to be witnessed. And as he drifts through the quiet, where your name once lived like a sacred echo, he will not find closure. He will find initiation. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.